Here we go with Alexander the Great. Alexander, nominative singular male. He entered, introverted, the forces. These are the narrows. It comes originally from the jaws of this ridgeline. It's a genitive, which they call the pilae, which is the gates. Contemplatus, so he's having contemplated the site, maybe the situation of the place, because we have locorum. It is said, dicator, that not otherwise or not in another place, alias, as has he more admiratus. So there's no place he admired more because of, this is very, very lucky, felicitatum. So no other place was he more admirable of his felicity. So it looks like it's still continuing with this head verb of contemplating. He would have been able to have been obruid, to have been overcome. Looks like vel, the adverb here, which means even. He's even confessed with rocks. He might have been overcome with, if there had been any, which could be propelled, which they could roll down basically to the subiunting, his men who are going underneath. The ita, the journey, the road, scarcely capiabated quaternos, four-armed martos, four-armed men. That's how narrow these jaws were. The dorsum of the mountain, the dorsal fins on the back, so you notice the back. It's like the ridge of the mountain was imminabating. It was hanging over the dative over the road. It was non-motor. Not only was it narrow, va and auguste, anguste is the adjective, but generally plurumque prerupta, means usually jagged or something, broken rocks types of thing. It was oberabanting rivers, wandering rivers, and crevice means of frequently. So the rocks are broken up with frequent wandering rivers, which men entered. They dripped out or something. They permeated or whatever from the roots of the mountain, the radicibus montium. Tamen. Nevertheless, we have accusatives here, so what have we got? Here's the nominative, it's this T. Nevertheless, he had ordered the Thracians, who had been levita armos, lightly armed. Pre means go in front, and cedere means to go, so he'd ordered them to go in front to, a bit of a purpose here, to scrutinise or look into the cals, the pathways, lest there could be occultus hostis, some sort of secretly hiding enemies, should erupt, burst out on, the subiunting, which we saw up here. These are his men who are subioing. Sub usually means coming from under, so if you're going up the mountain, you'd be coming from under. Sagittariorum, genitive for bowman. Also a menace, a handful or a band of archers had occupied the jugum. There's its genitive up here, and here's its nominative and accusative. It's a noun. They haberbanted. They had arcuses, which are bows, intentos, so they had their bows bent, having been monotied, advised that it was not inter ipsos in ere, that they were not going amongst themselves, but into prolium, into battle. Ipsos being a pronoun. I think this is a typo, so it's actually, they're not going on an ita, a bit of a journey or a march, but a battle. In this way, hoc modo, the agmen, the column of men, perveneted takes in or ad, they reached the city of Tarsus, Tarson in Latin, to whom, I guess this city then Maxime, especially at this time, the Persians, Perse, were subjecting it to fire. They were lighting the town on fire, lest this opulent town, Oppidum, the enemy should invade or take possession of this opulent. Opulent means there's a lot of resources there, so they're going to burn it. At Ili, but he, Alexander, premisso, this is at, what's it called, the ablative absolute. So he's sent ahead, pre means sent, misso, he'd sent Parmenion ahead to, looks like a purpose here, to inhibit or to stop the incendium, to stop the burning. He'd sent him with an expedited, so it means his feet are not encumbered. Ped means feet. And so they're unencumbered, so they're not taking a lot of baggage. And manu, again, is a band of men or a handful of men. Can be quite a large handful, like you can send 1,000 people and still call it a menace. Anyway, after, what do we got? There's the nominative again. After he got to know, or he understood, cognited, that the arrival, the adventure of his men, the barbarians had become fugitives, so he learnt that the barbarians had fled when his men arrived. He intraded again. He entered the city, which by himself had been conservatormed, had been saved from the burning. 5. Medium, accusative. So, Cydnus Amnus, the river Cydnus, what do we call it in English? We'll just take it as the same thing. 100% same translation. Cydnus, the river, concerning which, a little before we dictomest, we talked about it. It interflows through his medium. It flows through the middle of this area. And then Aestas it was. So it's an autumn, but it's actually, he uses summer here. So I guess it was a hot part of autumn, a summery type of autumn, of which the calor, the heat, not alias magus. This is like what he wrote up here, not alias magus up there. Anyway, where was I down here? So the heat, which is not more than the shore of Cilicia, did it burn with the vapor of the sun. So by not other more, he just means here it was at its most extreme or something. And the most fervent, it's superlative, the most hottest time had began of the day, di, fifth declension. Pulvere, ablative singular, similar. So at the same time, or as soon as the profuse king, the king was profuse with sudor, which is sweat, and pulvere, which is dust. So he was covered with dust and sweat. The liquor fluminous, so this would be the nominative, the liquor, you might want to say the liquid of the river, but usually means clear water of the river. It was inviting for this king who was drenched in sweat and dust. And ut, to ablurate means to wash his body, his corpus, which is neuter, which was still calidum, goes with the neuter. So his body was still hot. And so, Itaque, having deposited his vest, his clothing, in the sight of his column of man, in conspectu agnimus, which he was thinking of his future decorum. So he thought it would be fitting, maybe for a future example, if he ostendiced to his men, if he showed to his men that he was contentum esse with the light and parable coltu. So this would be in the clothing of his body. Levi just means easily parabellus, so it'd be easy to get clothing. It's fair sort of clothing, not really ostentatious, if you want to take the ostend bit there. Anyway, so he showed his body to his men, that and he descended into the flumen, into the river. Vixque, and scarcely ingressi, it's only one person that's got ingressi, so he's with a sudden horror when he had entered this river, his artus, you might want to say his joints or his limbs, began to rigere, to harden with this sudden horror. Deinde, then, he was suffusus est, he was suffused, a pallor suffused him, this is passive. So he became pale, and propimodum, nearly the whole almost of the vital heat corpus of his body liquided, it left. You get reliquo and etc. from that. So it's scarcely had gone into the water, and he had some sort of spasm maybe, and became pale, and his limbs weren't working. Okay, so I think they've doubly used this coepi bit, which takes the infinitive. So scarcely he'd began to enter, and his limbs began to rigere. Anyway, now what have we got? This looks nominative. His ministers, or his attendants, received him manu in their singular hand, and he was similar to a dative, to someone who had expired. And neither was he satisfactorily compos mentis, which means his brain was working, so he wasn't really normal. And they deferented him into the tent. They carried him or bore him into the tent. The Flentes, the weeping people were querubanting. They were a bit sad that in such an impetu and cursu, what have I got? This most famous king of this age and in memorable time, in the course of all of his life or whatever, and this impetu, so he's well, they're invading, I suppose. He had not at least fallen in Aches in battle, not dejected by the hoste, not he wasn't cast down by the enemy, but while he was abluenting, while he was washing in water, he was eruptum essayed and extinct. He was taken and became dead while he was there. Obviously he hasn't died. In stare Darium, this is reported speech, I guess that's why the quote marks are there. Darius is pressing in, he's in stowing. And he would be a victor before he had seen videsset the enemy. For themselves, Sibi, the same lands through which they had per agro means wandering through land, which victorious, or whether they had victory, they would repetandus. They would need to reseat the same land which they had just passed through victorious. Omnia. Everything, either themselves or the enemies, had been populated, been ravished or destroyed either by them or the enemies. Through the vast solitudes or wastelands, even if no one wanted to insequi them, to follow them, eunting, going along by famine and by inopia, by lack of things, they were able to be debellaried. I think that means destroyed very violently or something. Okay, so that's pretty much it for the day. Debello, to fight out or to the finish, to bring a battle or war to an end, vanquish or subdue. There we go. Whom would give a sign to the fugentibusing, to the fleeing, so who would command them? Who would dare to succeed the dative, to succeed Alexander? And now that if they should penetrate to the Hellespont in fuga, in flight, a fleet for which they could cross, who would prepare it? The end.